June 13, 2025. Inside the execution chamber at Broad River Correctional Institution in South Carolina, a 57-year-old man lay still on the gurney. His name, Stephen Christopher Stanko, a convicted killer sentenced to die for 2 separate murders. At exactly 6:29 in the evening, a dose of pentobarbital entered his system. 5 minutes later, he was declared dead. No one spoke. No family waited on his side of the glass. Only the quiet, watchful eyes of the victims' families, locked in silence as if staring into a wound that justice still hadn't healed. Once, the name Stephen Stanko stirred debate. He had spent nearly 9 years in prison for kidnapping and assault. After his release, he tried to reshape his image, writing a book from behind bars, presenting himself as thoughtful and reformed. Some called him polite, well-spoken, intelligent, but less than a year after stepping out of prison, he committed 2 brutal crimes. He murdered a woman who had offered him shelter, then killed a 74-year-old man who had shown him kindness, and in between, he assaulted a teenage girl. Leaving her critically injured, he knew right from wrong, but he still chose wrong. And when remorse arrives too late, does it still matter? And when remorse comes too late, does it still matter? Before we begin, drop a comment below. What country or state are you watching from? Let's see how far this story has reached. Stephen Stanko wasn't always a fugitive. At one point, he was seen as a symbol of second chances. Back in 1996, he was convicted in South Carolina for kidnapping and assault. He served 8.5 years out of a 10-year sentence. While inside, he co-authored a book titled Living in Prison, a history of the correctional system with an insider's view. In 2004, after being released, he moved to Myrtle Beach. He rented a room, was honest about his past, and tried to find steady work, though nothing lasted. Locals described him as intelligent-looking and reserved. He often said his criminal record made it nearly impossible to rebuild. About a year later, he told people he was moving to help care for a friend's elderly mother, but that wasn't true. Instead, he began spending hours at the public library, telling others he was researching a second book. There, he met Laura Ling, a 43-year-old librarian. What started as casual conversation soon became personal. Eventually, Laura invited him into her home, which she shared with her teenage daughter. Around that same time, Stephen Stanko began spending more time with a familiar face at the library, Henry Lee Turner, a 74-year-old retiree. They talked often, shared books, small talk between strangers who had become something like friends. But behind Stanko's calm demeanor was something darker. He wasn't just reading. He was collecting stories, obsessively consuming articles about Jeffrey Dahmer, Gary Ridgway, and other infamous serial killers. He claimed it was research, but to law enforcement, it looked like something else. Preparation. April 8, 2005. Inside a modest home in Morels Inlet, South Carolina, the home Laura Ling shared with her teenage daughter, a scream shattered the quiet. What happened next unfolded in minutes. Laura Ling, the woman who believed she was helping a man rebuild his life, was tragically killed. Her daughter was attacked and left in critical condition. But she didn't die. Bleeding and terrified, she reached a phone, dialed 911, and whispered, "My mom is dead. I've been hurt." When first responders arrived, it was too late for Laura, but her daughter was still alive, and her testimony would change everything. By then, Stephen Stanko was gone, but he didn't disappear into the night. He kept moving. And by that same evening, he was knocking on Henry Turner's door. He told Henry his father had just passed. He needed a place to stay. The elderly man didn't ask questions, just let him in. The next morning, over eggs and toast, they had breakfast like nothing had happened. And when Henry went to the bathroom to shave, back turned, unaware, Stanko walked in, raised a gun, pressed a pillow against it, and pulled the trigger. Henry dropped, wounded, but still breathing. So Stanko struck him again, then fired again, causing fatal injuries. Then he cleaned out Henry's wallet, took his truck, and vanished. Over the next 48 hours, Stanko drove south. blending in with the crowds pouring into Augusta, Georgia for the Masters golf tournament. He claimed to be a businessman, told people he owned a chain of Hooters restaurants. No one questioned him. He looked the part, spoke well, dressed sharp, but his photo was already everywhere. Wanted posters, news alerts, a $10,000 reward. On April 12th, a woman he had been staying with opened the newspaper and saw his face. She didn't hesitate. She called the police. Federal agents arrived within hours. Stanko was arrested without resistance. Inside the apartment, they found the murder weapon, a stolen laptop, and piles of evidence. Stephen Stanko, once called articulate and refined, now sat in cuffs. Silent. August 18, 2006. Nearly 16 months after the killings, Stanko stood trial in Georgetown County, South Carolina. He was charged with the murder of Laura Ling and the attempted murder of her daughter. The courtroom was tense. Prosecutors played the 911 call. The girl's voice, shaking, afraid but alive, echoed through the room. The defense didn't deny the crime. Instead, they pleaded insanity, hoping to spare Stanko from the death penalty. But the jury didn't buy it. They ruled that the killings were deliberate, calculated, and carried out after Stanko left Laura's home. The sentence, death, for the murder of Laura Ling, plus 110 years in prison for the assault, the attempted murder, and armed robbery. 3 years later, in November of 2009, Stanko faced trial again, this time in Horry County for the murder of Henry Turner. The court found he had shot the elderly man during his escape, with the clear intent to steal his money and vehicle. And once again, the verdict was death. For the second time, Stephen Stanko was sentenced to death. At both trials, he never spoke in his own defense. He didn't plead for mercy. He sat in silence, as if the outcome no longer mattered. After the verdicts, Stanko was transferred to Broad River Correctional Institution, where South Carolina houses its death row inmates. In the early years, he remained out of the public eye. No interviews, no statements, no requests for clemency. But the legal process continued behind the scenes. Under South Carolina law, death sentences trigger automatic appeals, and Stanko's case followed the same path. On September 23, 2007, he appeared before the South Carolina Supreme Court, seeking to overturn his conviction for the murder of Laura Ling. His legal team argued that the trial judge had failed to allow proper jury questioning about mental illness, and that Stanko's age and psychological history should have been considered as mitigating factors. The court disagreed. The conviction and the death sentence were upheld. In 2013, he filed a second appeal, this time for the murder of Henry Turner. That, too, was denied. The court ruled that the trial had been fair and the sentence appropriate. By 2015, he filed a final petition for post-conviction relief, claiming that a brain abnormality might have influenced his actions. But after several hearings, the court again found no grounds for change. On May 24, 2016, the sentence was reaffirmed. Then came May of 2024. Nearly 8 years later, Stanko made his last legal move, a petition to the United States Supreme Court. It was denied on May 5, 2025. After nearly 2 decades of litigation, every appeal had failed. On May 16th, the South Carolina Supreme Court issued an execution order, setting the date for June 13th, the earliest legally available time following a state holiday. Under state law, inmates are given a choice of execution method: electric chair, lethal injection, or firing squad. If no choice is made, the default is the electric chair. Initially, Stanko considered the firing squad. He said it seemed quick, clean, but after reviewing a report from an earlier execution, one in which a man's body was severely damaged and the process dragged on far longer than expected, he changed his mind. He asked the court for more information about the procedures. They denied the request. By the deadline, Stephen Stanko chose lethal injection. On the afternoon of June 13th, he was served his final meal: fried fish, fried shrimp, crab cake, baked potato, carrots, fried okra, cherry pie, banana pudding, and sweet tea. At 6:29 in the evening, he was strapped to the gurney inside the chamber at Broad River. An IV line was inserted. The first dose of pentobarbital began to flow. When asked for final words, Stanko delivered a statement lasting over 3 minutes. He apologized to the families. "I am truly sorry for the pain and loss that I caused in this horrible situation. Sorry is never enough, but that does not mean it should not be said." He appeared to whisper something under his breath. His lips moved. His eyes drifted toward the viewing room, where the families of the victims sat, watching in silence. At 6:34, he was pronounced dead. No one in the room cried. No one spoke. Only one voice broke the silence, the son of Henry Turner, who had waited nearly 20 years for justice. He told the press, "This should have ended years ago. My father was a good man. He didn't deserve to die for trusting the wrong person." Stephen Stanko, once seen as an educated man, a model of rehabilitation, died with every illusion stripped away. No glory, no escape, just silence. And the kind of memory that time alone cannot erase.